You don't live here anymore.
Then say it again.
You recorded us?
You missed the local copy.
Anthony Wilson was 42, an appliance repair technician with grease beneath his nails and an old Ford Transit in the driveway. Everyone in Brookhaven believed his wife Elizabeth was the successful one. Anthony wore faded work shirts, carried a dented toolbox, and spent his nights alone in the garage. What they didn't know was that his battery cooling patents were worth $96 million. Then Elizabeth threw his clothes onto the rain-soaked lawn, and a black limousine stopped behind him. Before we continue, comment your country and local time below. And subscribe, because what stepped out of that limousine changed everything Elizabeth thought she knew about her husband. 6 months before the limousine appeared on Cedar Hollow Drive, Anthony Wilson began most mornings before sunrise. At 5:42 a.m., the alarm on his old digital clock clicked twice before sounding. Anthony shut it off before the second beep. He had learned to move quietly. Elizabeth hated being awakened before 7. He dressed in the laundry room, pulling on dark work pants and a faded navy shirt with Anthony stitched above the left pocket. The collar had softened after hundreds of washes. A pale burn mark crossed one sleeve from a restaurant oven repair 3 winters earlier. His breakfast was always the same: black coffee, 2 pieces of toast, 1 hard-boiled egg wrapped in a paper towel for later. By 6:15, his white Ford Transit was rolling out of Brookhaven toward Decatur. The van was 12 years old. The rear bumper carried a shallow dent. 1 hubcap was missing. Inside, every tool had a place. Voltage meters hung from labeled hooks. Replacement valves sat in clear plastic bins. Service manuals were arranged by manufacturer. Elizabeth called it an embarrassment. "Park it behind the house when I have clients coming," she had told him more than once. People notice things like that. Anthony had looked through the kitchen window at the van. "It's a work vehicle. It looks like failure on 4 wheels." He had not answered. Foster Appliance Services occupied a brick building behind a tire shop on East College Avenue. Its blue sign had faded, almost gray. Raymond Foster had owned the company for 23 years and trusted Anthony with every job carrying the words "impossible," "urgent," or "already repaired" twice. That Monday, Raymond stood beside the dispatch board holding a service ticket. "Marietta Cold Storage Unit," he said. "Compressor keeps tripping. They've had 2 companies out there." Anthony took the paper. "What did they replace? Contactor overload relay and half the control panel. Did anyone check the phase imbalance?" Raymond smiled. "That's why you're going." Noah Bennett looked up from a tool cart nearby. He was 24, broad-shouldered, and still new enough to wipe fingerprints from every wrench before putting it away. "Can I ride with him?" Noah asked. Raymond glanced at Anthony. Anthony nodded once. They reached the warehouse at 7:40. The building smelled of cardboard, cold metal, and leaking ammonia from an older system in the rear section. A manager in a red vest led them to a refrigeration unit taller than Anthony. "It runs for 12 minutes, the manager said. Then everything shuts down. Anthony placed his coffee on the floor. "Show me the breaker panel." For the next 40 minutes, he said almost nothing. He checked voltage under load. He inspected the motor leads. He opened a junction box behind the compressor and found a wire darkened by heat. Noah leaned closer. "That doesn't look bad enough to kill the whole system." Anthony touched the insulation with a screwdriver. It cracked. Damage starts where people stop looking. He cut away the burned section. Beneath it, the copper had turned black. The previous technicians had replaced expensive parts without finding the loose terminal that caused the heat. By 9:18, the compressor was running smoothly. The warehouse manager stared at the old components stacked beside the machine. "You're telling me none of those needed replacing?" "Not for this problem." "How much is this going to cost?" Anthony wrote the labor time and 1 connector on the invoice. The manager looked at the total. "That's it." "That's the repair." Back in the van, Noah shook his head. You could have charged more. Anthony started the engine. For what they were ready to pay. That doesn't make it ours. Noah looked out the window, thinking about that. Anthony did not lecture him. He rarely lectured anyone. He showed Noah how to read heat marks, how to listen for an uneven motor, and how to distrust any diagnosis made before a panel had been opened. At noon, Anthony ate the egg from his pocket while parked outside a laundromat in Avondale Estates. Elizabeth sent him a photograph during lunch. She stood inside a marble foyer beside a glass staircase, smiling in a cream-colored suit. The message beneath the picture read, "Closing another $1.8 million property." Some of us are moving forward. Anthony studied the photograph for a moment. He typed, "Congratulations." 3 dots appeared, then vanished. No reply came. Elizabeth worked for Whitaker Premier Realty, a luxury brokerage with offices in Buckhead. Her business cards were thick enough to feel like plastic. She drove a black Mercedes, leased through the company, and carried handbags Anthony knew cost more than his entire tool collection. When they first married, she had sold modest homes to young families. She used to return from work with stories about children choosing bedrooms and couples arguing over kitchen cabinets. Now she spoke mostly about square footage commissions and people's watches. At dinner parties, she introduced herself as a senior luxury property specialist. Anthony was usually introduced afterward. "My husband repairs appliances," she would say, smiling before anyone could ask. There was always a pause after the word repairs. Anthony noticed it. He simply never filled it. What Elizabeth never mentioned was that Anthony understood systems far more complex than refrigerators and washing machines. Every night after returning from service calls, he entered the garage and locked the door behind him. The back half of the garage did not resemble a repairman's hobby space. Aluminum channels rested on a steel table. Temperature sensors were connected to a laptop. A transparent test chamber sat beneath an exhaust hood Anthony had built himself. For 11 years, he had been refining a thermal control system designed to prevent cascading heat failure inside large battery installations. The first sketches belonged to his father, Harold Wilson. Harold had spent 34 years as an electrical engineer. He believed battery storage would reshape the American power grid, but he also believed manufacturers underestimated the danger of trapped heat. "Electricity doesn't forgive pride," Harold once told Anthony. "Neither does temperature." After Harold died, Anthony found 4 notebooks in a locked desk drawer. The early calculations were incomplete. Some were wrong. Others were years ahead of the equipment available when Harold wrote them. Anthony continued the work. He never called himself an inventor. He tested, he measured, he failed. Then he tested again. At 10:26 that Monday night, Anthony watched a temperature graph flatten across his laptop screen. The newest cooling channel had held the battery module below the critical threshold for 3 consecutive hours. He recorded the result in a black notebook. Test 431. Stable at full load. From inside the house, Elizabeth laughed during a phone call. Her voice carried through the wall. Anthony shut down the test chamber and checked his email. A new message waited from Margaret Hayes, Chief Legal Officer at Whitmore Energy Systems. The subject line read, "Confidential Technical Review Update." Anthony opened it. The company's engineering team had completed the 3rd phase of independent testing. His patent portfolio had passed. The acquisition committee would now begin final valuation. One sentence appeared near the bottom. Based on preliminary commercial projections, the proposed transaction may exceed $90 million. Anthony read the sentence twice. His breathing did not change. He printed the email, signed the acknowledgement page, and placed both documents inside a plain envelope. Then he opened the steel cabinet beneath the workbench. Inside were patent certificates, laboratory reports, Harold's notebooks, and a sealed folder from Catherine Brooks, the attorney who had handled his father's estate. Anthony placed the new letter behind the folder and turned the key. The following evening, he returned home at 7:10. Elizabeth's Mercedes was gone. The kitchen lights were off. Anthony entered the garage carrying a replacement pressure gauge he had purchased after work. He stopped 3 steps inside. A thin line of dust had been disturbed beneath the cabinet. He set down the gauge. The cabinet door appeared closed, but the right edge sat slightly lower than before. Anthony crouched and examined the lock. Fresh scratches marked the metal around the keyway. He unlocked it. The notebooks remained stacked in order. The patent documents were still inside. The envelope from Whitmore Energy Systems had not moved. Nothing appeared missing. Anthony stood motionless in the quiet garage. Then he noticed the smallest detail. The confidential letter had been returned with the folded edge facing left. Anthony always placed folded edges to the right. Someone had opened the cabinet, and whoever it was had taken the time to make the room look untouched. Anthony did not touch anything else inside the cabinet. He stood in the garage for nearly a minute, studying the shelves as if they belonged to someone else. The patent folders were still aligned. Harold's notebooks remained beneath the metal divider. The Whitmore letter looked untouched except for the reversed fold. That was enough. Anthony closed the cabinet, turned the key, and placed it in his pocket. He did not search the house. He did not call Elizabeth. He did not send an angry message asking whether she had entered the garage. A question asked too early could become a warning. Instead, Anthony took 3 photographs of the scratches around the lock. He photographed the disturbed dust beneath the cabinet and the position of every folder inside. Then he copied the garage camera logs onto a small flash drive. At 8:03, Elizabeth's Mercedes entered the driveway. Anthony heard the garage door on her side rise. A moment later, her heels crossed the kitchen tile. Anthony. In here. She appeared at the garage doorway, wearing a fitted black dress beneath a camel-colored coat. A thin gold necklace rested against her throat. Her makeup was still perfect, but she carried the faint smell of expensive cologne that did not belong to him. Elizabeth looked at the open laptop on his workbench. You're still doing this. Anthony shut the test file. Finishing a measurement. It's after 8. I noticed. She glanced toward the steel cabinet, only for a second. Then her eyes returned to him. I had dinner with clients. How did it go? We may have an offer on the Ansley Park property. That's good. Elizabeth removed one earring while standing in the doorway. You could sound more interested. Anthony watched the small movement of her fingers. I said it was good. That isn't the same thing. She turned and walked into the house. Anthony remained in the garage. The exchange had lasted less than a minute, but he had learned something. Elizabeth knew where the cabinet was. She knew enough to look at it. That did not prove she had opened it. It only meant he needed to pay attention. Over the next 2 weeks, changes appeared in small pieces. Elizabeth began keeping her phone face down at dinner. She carried it from room to room, even when she went upstairs to take a shower. The 6-digit passcode Anthony had known for 3 years no longer worked. She started returning home after 10. Her explanations were polished. A late showing in Buckhead, a client dinner at Atlas, a networking event at the Four Seasons. Anthony did not challenge the details. He recorded them in a pocket notebook he kept inside the locked compartment of his van. Tuesday 9:47 p.m. Said she was with Whitaker team. Thursday 10:26 p.m. Said property inspection ran late. Saturday 11:18 p.m. Said client changed dinner time. He disliked writing the entries. Each one made the marriage feel less like a life and more like a damaged machine he had been asked to diagnose. Machines were easier. A failed relay did not lie about where it had been. One evening, Elizabeth left her phone on the kitchen counter while pouring wine. The screen lit with an incoming call. Bradley Shaw. She crossed the room and silenced it before the second vibration. Anthony continued cutting a piece of chicken. Bradley from the Midtown project, he asked. Elizabeth placed the phone beside her glass. He has several projects. I've heard the name. Most people in Atlanta real estate have. Her answer arrived too quickly. Anthony looked at her. Is he buying something through Whitaker? He develops property, Anthony. He buys and sells constantly. She drank from the glass. Why are you asking? No reason? Elizabeth smiled without warmth. You don't usually care who my clients are. I remember names. That must be useful when you're fixing microwaves. Anthony set down his knife. The insult was familiar. What changed was the purpose behind it. Elizabeth was no longer dismissing him casually. She was pushing him away from the subject. He let her. 3 days later, she placed a blue folder beside his breakfast plate. I need you to sign these. Anthony looked at the folder but did not open it. What are they? Home equity documents? For what? Elizabeth poured coffee into a white porcelain mug. She did not offer him any. I'm opening my own office. That's new. I've been discussing it for months. Not with me. She sat across from him. Because every time I talk about growth, you stare at me like I'm speaking another language. Anthony opened the folder. The first page carried the logo of Belmont Ridge Holdings, LLC. The company name meant nothing to him. You already formed a company. It's part of the financing structure. Who prepared this? A business attorney Bradley recommended. Anthony turned another page. The proposed credit line was secured against the Brookhaven house. The amount listed was $875,000. He read it twice. The house had been purchased 9 years earlier. Anthony's inheritance from Harold had covered 60% of the down payment. The remaining mortgage balance was less than $180,000. You want to borrow $875,000 against the house. I want access to capital. That isn't the same sentence. Elizabeth placed her mug down. Luxury real estate requires presentation, office space, staff, marketing, events. You cannot build a serious company from a spare bedroom. What office space? I'm looking at a location near Phipps Plaza. Do you have projections? Her jaw tightened. I have clients. That wasn't my question. You wouldn't understand the projections. Anthony continued reading. A section near the middle gave Belmont Ridge Holdings authority to manage encumber lease or transfer the property under certain conditions. Elizabeth was named managing member. Bradley Shaw was identified as development consultant. Anthony looked up. Why is Bradley involved? He introduced me to the lender. Why does that make him a consultant? Because he knows commercial development. This is our house. Elizabeth leaned back. There it is. What that tone? Anthony closed the folder. What tone? The one you use when you feel threatened. I'm reviewing a legal document. You're trying to control me because my career is moving faster than yours. Anthony's thumb rested against the edge of the folder. The old version of Elizabeth had once asked him to review every contract she received. She trusted his patience with details. She said he could find a loose sentence the way he found a loose wire. Now the same patience offended her. I'm not signing this tonight, he said. Elizabeth laughed once. Of course you aren't. I need time to read it. You've had 11 years for your little project in the garage. I'm asking for one signature. You're asking to put the house behind an $875,000 loan. It's my house too. Yes? And my income has carried us for years. Anthony looked at her carefully. His salary paid the mortgage, utilities, insurance, and most household expenses. Elizabeth's commissions paid for the Mercedes Designer Clothes Club memberships and the image she presented to clients. He could have listed every number. He chose not to. Leave the documents with me, he said. Elizabeth stood. Bradley said you'd do this. Anthony's eyes lifted. What exactly did Bradley say? She reached for the folder, but Anthony placed his hand over it. You said I could review it. For a moment, neither moved. Then Elizabeth released the folder. He said, men like you confuse caution with intelligence. Anthony felt the words settle. Men like me. Men who are afraid to take risks. She carried her coffee upstairs. Anthony waited until he heard the bedroom door close. Then he removed his phone and photographed every page. There were 47. At 6:32 that evening, he sent the images through an encrypted portal to Catherine Brooks. Catherine had handled Harold Wilson's estate, Anthony's first patent filing, and the purchase records for the Brookhaven house. She worked from a quiet office on the 17th floor of a building near Peachtree Center. She called Anthony the next morning. "Can you meet today?" Her voice was controlled, but the question carried no hesitation. Anthony checked the service schedule. 4:30. Come to my office. Don't sign anything. At 4:28, Anthony stepped out of the elevator holding the blue folder inside a plain canvas bag. Catherine Brooks was 51 silver, beginning to show at her temples. She wore dark glasses and kept her desk almost empty. She did not waste time. "This is not a standard home equity agreement. I assumed that. The loan is only one part." She turned to a marked page. "This language gives Belmont Ridge Holdings broad control over the property. Elizabeth manages Belmont." "Yes?" "And Bradley Shaw receives consulting authority over any redevelopment or transfer." Anthony sat across from her. "Can they sell the house without me not lawfully? But this document is designed to create the appearance that you already approved future actions." Catherine opened a second file on her desk. "There's more." She slid a notarized document toward him. Anthony saw his name at the bottom. The signature looked close. The first letter leaned correctly. The final stroke curved the way his usually did. But it was not his signature. "What is this? A limited power of attorney filed with the loan package." Anthony read the date. He had been repairing a commercial freezer in Macon that day. Foster Appliance Services had GPS records invoices and a customer signature placing him more than 80 miles away. "This says I appeared before a notary." "It does." "I didn't." "I know." Catherine tapped the seal. "The notary is Melissa Crane. She has handled at least 6 transactions connected to Shaw Urban Development." Anthony looked at the forged signature again. The room felt very still. "Does Elizabeth know this exists?" Catherine removed her glasses. "We cannot assume anything yet. She brought me the rest of the paperwork." "Yes. What do I do?" "You keep the original folder. You document every conversation. You do not accuse her. And you do not let anyone know we found this." Anthony's expression remained flat, but his hand tightened around the edge of the page. Catherine noticed. "Anthony, listen carefully. A forged signature is rarely the beginning of a plan. It is usually something people use after the plan is already moving." She opened another database record on her computer. Belmont Ridge Holdings had been registered 8 months earlier. Elizabeth Wilson was listed as managing member. Bradley Shaw was listed as authorized consultant. And beside the filing was the name of the registered agent, Melissa Crane. Catherine turned the screen toward Anthony. "The person who notarized your forged signature is not merely connected to Bradley's company." Anthony read the address beneath Melissa's name. It matched a suite inside Shaw Urban Development's Atlanta office. Catherine's voice lowered. "She works inside it." Anthony did not touch anything else inside the cabinet. He studied the shelves. The patent folders were aligned. Harold's notebooks remained beneath the metal divider. The Whitmore letter appeared untouched except for the reversed fold. That was enough. Anthony closed the cabinet, turned the key, and placed it in his pocket. He did not search the house or call Elizabeth. A question asked too early could become a warning. Instead, he photographed the scratches around the lock, the disturbed dust, and every folder. Then he copied the garage camera logs onto a flash drive and locked it inside his van. At 8:03, Elizabeth's Mercedes entered the driveway. "Anthony in here?" She appeared at the garage doorway wearing a black dress beneath a camel coat. "You're still doing this?" "Finishing a measurement. It's after 8. I noticed." Her eyes moved towards the steel cabinet. "Only for a second. I had dinner with clients." "How did it go?" We may have an offer on the Ansley Park property. That's good. You could sound more interested. I said it was good. That isn't the same thing. She walked into the house. It meant he needed to pay attention. Over the next 2 weeks, the changes arrived in small pieces. Elizabeth kept her phone face down at dinner. She carried it from room to room. The passcode Anthony had known for years no longer worked. She started returning home after 10. Anthony recorded the details in a notebook inside his van. One evening, Elizabeth left her phone on the kitchen counter. The screen lit with an incoming call. Bradley Shaw. She silenced it before the second vibration. Anthony continued cutting his chicken. Bradley from the Midtown Project. He has several projects. I've heard the name. Most people in Atlanta real estate have. Her answer came too quickly. Is he buying through Whitaker? He develops property, Anthony. Why are you asking? No reason. Elizabeth smiled without warmth. You don't usually care who my clients are. I remember names. That must be useful when you're fixing microwaves. 3 days later, Elizabeth placed a blue folder beside his breakfast plate. I need you to sign these. What are they, home equity documents? For what, I'm opening my own office. That's new. I've discussed it for months. Not with me. Elizabeth sat across from him. Every time I talk about growth, you stare at me like I'm speaking another language. Anthony opened the folder. The first page carried the logo of Belmont Ridge Holdings, LLC. You formed a company. It's part of the financing structure. Who prepared this? A business attorney Bradley recommended. The proposed credit line was secured against the Brookhaven house. The amount listed was $875,000. Anthony read it twice. You want to borrow $875,000 against the house. I want access to capital. That isn't the same sentence. Luxury real estate requires presentation. Office space, staff, marketing. We're near Phipps Plaza. Do you have projections? You wouldn't understand them. A clause gave Belmont Ridge Holdings authority to manage encumber lease or transfer the property. Elizabeth was named managing member. Bradley Shaw was identified as development consultant. Why is Bradley involved? He introduced me to the lender. This is our house. There it is. What that tone? The one you use when you feel threatened. I'm reviewing a legal document. You're trying to control me because my career is moving faster than yours. Anthony closed the folder. I'm not signing tonight. Of course you aren't. I need time. You've had 11 years for your little project. I'm asking for one signature. You're asking to put the house behind an $875,000 loan. It's my house too. Yes. And my income has carried us for years. Leave the documents with me. Elizabeth stood. Bradley said you'd do this. Anthony looked up. What exactly did Bradley say? He said men like you confuse caution with intelligence. She walked upstairs. Anthony photographed all 47 pages and sent them to Catherine Brooks through an encrypted portal. Catherine called the next morning. Can you meet today 4:30? Come to my office. Don't sign anything. At 4:28, Anthony stepped out of the elevator carrying the folder inside a canvas bag. Catherine Brooks was 51, with silver at her temples. She wore dark glasses and kept her desk nearly empty. This is not a standard home equity agreement, she said. I assumed that. The loan is only one part. Belmont Ridge Holdings receives broad control over the property. Can they sell the house without me? Not lawfully. But the paperwork creates the appearance that you approved future actions. Catherine slid a notarized document toward him. Anthony saw his name at the bottom. The signature looked close. It was not his. What is this, a limited power of attorney filed with the loan package? Anthony read the date. He had been repairing a commercial freezer in Macon that day. This says I appeared before a notary. It does. I didn't. I know. Catherine tapped the seal. The notary is Melissa Crane. She handled 6 transactions connected to Shaw Urban Development. Anthony looked at the forged signature. He understood why Catherine sounded careful. The document was not careless paperwork. Someone had copied his signature, chosen a cooperative notary, and quietly built an entire legal path around his consent. Does Elizabeth know we cannot assume anything yet? What do? You document everything. You do not accuse her. You do not let anyone know we found this. Catherine turned her monitor toward him. Belmont Ridge Holdings had been registered 8 months earlier. Elizabeth was listed as managing member. Bradley was listed as authorized consultant. The registered agent was Melissa Crane. Anthony read the address beneath her name. It matched a suite inside Shaw Urban Development's Atlanta office. Catherine lowered her voice. The woman who notarized your forged signature does not merely work with Bradley. She pointed to the address. She works inside his company. Anthony left Catherine's office with the forged power of attorney inside his canvas bag. He did not drive home immediately. Instead, he parked beneath the concrete overhang of a closed pharmacy on Peachtree Street and read the document again under the yellow light. The signature still looked close enough to deceive someone who had never watched him sign his name. The date was wrong. The pressure marks were wrong. Even the final curve was too careful. Someone had practiced. Anthony photographed the document from 6 angles, then called Raymond Foster. I need tomorrow morning off. Raymond paused. Everything all right? I have a legal appointment. You need the whole day, just the morning. Take it. At home, Elizabeth was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine and a laptop open across her knees. How was work, she asked. Long. Did you read the documents? I'm still reviewing them. Her fingers stopped above the keyboard. For how long? Until I understand them. Elizabeth closed the laptop. The lender cannot hold the terms forever. Then the lender can wait. Anthony walked upstairs without mentioning Catherine Melissa Crane or the forged signature. The next morning, he met Catherine at Miller's Corner Diner in Decatur. Catherine arrived carrying a slim black case. I checked Melissa Crane's commission, she said after sitting down. It is active, so she can legally notarize documents. She can legally notarize signatures she witnesses. She cannot claim you appeared before her when you did not. What happens if we report it now? Possibly nothing useful. Catherine opened the case and removed a printed timeline. If Melissa denies wrongdoing, she may claim someone presented false identification. Elizabeth may say the document came from Bradley. Bradley may say a loan assistant handled it. Everyone gets warned. Records disappear. So we wait. We preserve evidence first. Anthony studied the timeline. Catherine had listed the formation of Belmont Ridge Holdings, the property appraisal, the loan application, and the power of attorney. You built this overnight. I dislike forged signatures. Catherine pointed to the bottom of the page. I want copies of your work records from the date of the notarization. GPS logs, invoices, customer signatures, anything placing you in Macon. I can get them. Also save every message from Elizabeth concerning the loan. She rarely puts details in writing. Then document conversations immediately afterward. Dates, times, exact words. Do you have security cameras at home? Yes. Who controls the account Elizabeth has the primary login? Check whether footage still exists from the days Bradley visited. I never said Bradley visited. No. But if they were interested in your signature, your house, and your company records, I would assume they wanted more than dinner. Anthony remembered the disturbed dust beneath the cabinet. He drove home. Elizabeth had already left for work. The security system showed 6 exterior cameras and 3 interior cameras. Anthony opened the cloud archive from the kitchen computer. The previous 30 days were available. Anything older displayed a gray message. Footage deleted by account administrator. Anthony checked the access history. Several deletions had occurred between 1:00 and 3:00 in the morning, always while he was asleep. Elizabeth's account had authorized each one. He had installed the system 4 years earlier after a series of garage burglaries in Brookhaven. Elizabeth had wanted a simple commercial package. Anthony had added a local backup drive behind the garage control panel because cloud systems failed. She had forgotten. He removed the panel with a screwdriver and disconnected the small drive. Then he attached it to an old laptop that had never been connected to the household network. The archive opened slowly. Anthony searched by date. The first recording showed Elizabeth's Mercedes leaving at 8:11 a.m. 30 minutes later, it returned. Bradley Shaw drove. He wore a navy suit and carried no briefcase. Elizabeth opened the side door before he knocked. Anthony watched them enter the kitchen. There was no sound in the backup file. Bradley touched Elizabeth's lower back as she led him towards the hallway. Anthony's jaw tightened. He moved to the next camera. Bradley entered the garage alone. He examined the workbench, opened 2 drawers, and photographed the steel cabinet. Elizabeth appeared at the doorway and pointed toward the lock. Bradley removed something thin from his pocket and worked on it for nearly 3 minutes. The cabinet opened. Anthony watched him lift Harold's notebooks, scanned several patent pages with his phone, and remove the Whitmore envelope. Elizabeth stood beside him while he read it. Anthony felt no explosion of anger. The feeling was colder. It settled behind his ribs and sharpened every detail on the screen. Bradley returned the letter incorrectly. Then he crouched beside the cabinet and reached underneath the lowest shelf. Anthony rewound the footage. Bradley's hand disappeared behind a steel support. When it returned, his fingers were empty. Anthony paused the image. He went to the cabinet and knelt on the concrete floor. Dust coated the underside of the shelf except for one clean rectangle. His fingers found a small black device held in place by a magnet. A green light blinked once. It was a microphone. From inside the house, Elizabeth called his name. Anthony remained still, holding the device in his palm. Anthony. Her footsteps crossed the kitchen. He looked at the blinking light, then returned the microphone to the exact place Bradley had hidden it. Elizabeth opened the garage door. "What are you doing down there?" Anthony rose slowly and wiped the dust from his hand, looking for a dropped screw. She watched him for a moment. "Did you find it, yes?" Anthony closed the cabinet. And in that instant he understood that the microphone was not only evidence. It was a door. From now on, Bradley and Elizabeth would hear exactly what Anthony wanted them to hear. Anthony waited until Elizabeth went upstairs before returning to the garage. He closed the door, turned on the workbench lamp, and looked beneath the cabinet. The microphone remained where Bradley had placed it. A listening device created 2 kinds of danger. The first was obvious. Someone could hear information Anthony wanted to protect. The second was more useful. Someone could believe information Anthony wanted them to hear. He opened his laptop and pulled up an old test report from 3 years earlier. The prototype described in it had failed under sustained heat. Its cooling channels were too narrow. The pressure seals weakened after 90 minutes, and the battery module exceeded the safe temperature limit. Anthony printed the report and left it on the workbench. Then he called Catherine from his personal phone, but he made the call from inside his van with the doors locked. "I found a microphone," he said. "Did you remove it?" "No, I put it back." Catherine was silent for a moment. "Good. You expected me to leave it. I expected you to understand its value." Anthony watched Elizabeth's bedroom light through the windshield. "I want them to think the invention failed. That carries risk. Anything you say could be recorded and used out of context. I won't lie about a transaction or create false legal evidence. I'll talk about an old prototype. Make sure every document you leave behind is either yours or clearly marked as preliminary." "It will be." "And, Anthony, yes, do not become careless because you know they are watching. People who believe they have an advantage often take bigger risks. That is what I am counting on." The next evening, Anthony began the performance. He entered the garage at 7:20 and left the door slightly open. Elizabeth was in the kitchen speaking to someone through wireless earbuds. Anthony placed his phone on the workbench and called an unused voicemail number connected to his repair business. He spoke loudly enough for the microphone to capture every word. The latest test failed again, he said. The seals cannot maintain pressure, and the temperature rose 14 degrees above the limit. He paused, as though listening. No. Whitmore has not made a final offer. Another pause. I understand they may close the review. Anthony looked toward the kitchen door. Elizabeth's voice had stopped. He continued. If the patent office challenges the new claims, I may let the application expire. I cannot keep spending money on something that does not work. He ended the call and remained still. A cabinet door closed inside the kitchen. Anthony placed the failed test report beside the laptop and left it there overnight. The next morning, the report had shifted half an inch. Elizabeth's behavior changed within 48 hours. She stopped asking about the steel cabinet. She no longer watched Anthony when he entered the garage. Her impatience became less guarded, as though the possibility of his invention having value had been the only reason to treat him carefully. On Thursday evening, she stood in the doorway while Anthony cleaned a corroded control board. "How is the science experiment?" she asked. Anthony kept working. "Not good. I'm shocked." He removed a damaged capacitor with a soldering iron. The latest test failed. Elizabeth crossed her arms. "Maybe that is the universe telling you something. I don't take engineering advice from the universe. No, you just waste 11 years ignoring reality." Anthony placed the capacitor in a metal tray. Possibly. The answer seemed to please her more than an argument would have. She stepped into the garage and glanced at the failed report. "You know what your problem is?" Anthony looked at her. "You confuse persistence with talent." He said nothing. Elizabeth picked up the report, read the first page, and returned it to the bench. Bradley built his first development company before he was 35. That is impressive. He understands when an idea has commercial value, and when it does not, he does not become emotionally attached to failure. Anthony watched her leave. That night he photographed the fingerprints visible on the report under an angled work light. The following morning an email arrived from Margaret Hayes. She requested a private meeting at Whitmore Energy Systems' Atlanta office and included a secure telephone number. Anthony called from the parking lot behind Foster Appliance Services. Margaret answered on the second ring. "Mr. Wilson, thank you for returning my call. What does the committee need?" "The committee has completed its review. Charles Whitmore has also reviewed Dr. Samuel Reed's findings." Anthony leaned against the van. "And Mr. Whitmore wants to meet you personally. When? Next Tuesday, if you are available." Anthony looked toward the service building. Noah was loading replacement motors into another truck. "I can be available. There is another matter. Our legal team is preparing the acquisition structure. We need confirmation that no third party has access to your technical records." Anthony glanced at the van's locked rear compartment where he had placed copies of the camera footage. "Someone entered my home workspace." Margaret's voice became more formal. "Was anything taken? Patent pages were photographed. A preliminary drawing may have been seen. A listening device was installed. Have you contacted law enforcement? My attorney is preserving evidence first. Who is your attorney? Catherine Brooks. I know the firm." Anthony lowered his voice. "My wife may be involved." Margaret did not respond immediately. "Does she know Whitmore is considering an acquisition?" She saw an earlier letter. She does not know the review passed. "Mr. Wilson, we may need to suspend communication." "No. That would normally be our recommendation." A sudden silence would tell them the information they heard was false. Margaret considered that. "What are you asking us to do?" "Continue technical communication through the secure portal, delay public filings, coordinate directly with Catherine on any ownership disclosures. We cannot conceal marital assets. I am not asking you to. Then what are you asking to prevent forged documents from reaching the transaction before the truth does?" Margaret's tone softened slightly. "I will speak with our general counsel." "Thank you." "Mr. Wilson." Charles Whitmore does not usually attend preliminary meetings. This is not preliminary anymore, is it? No, Margaret said. It is not. Anthony ended the call and returned to work. That Saturday, Elizabeth informed him that she was hosting dinner at the house. She did not ask. Bradley is bringing 2 investors, she said, while arranging white flowers in the dining room. They are considering properties near Chastain Park. What time? 7? I may still be working. Then use the side entrance. Anthony looked at her. Why? Because you come home smelling like machine oil? At 7:18, Anthony entered through the front door wearing his Navy uniform. A dark stain crossed one knee from a leaking restaurant dishwasher. Elizabeth stood near the fireplace with Bradley Shaw and a couple in formal clothes. Her smile tightened. You are home. I live here. Bradley turned. He was taller than Anthony had expected, with carefully cut gray hair and a silver watch visible beneath his cuff. Elizabeth gestured toward Anthony. This is my husband, Anthony. He is the handyman who keeps everything running. The male guest smiled politely. Home maintenance appliance repair, Elizabeth said before Anthony could answer. Bradley lifted his glass. Honest work. Not everyone is built for risk. Anthony met his eyes. No, some people prefer using other people's property. The room became quiet for half a second. Then Anthony walked into the kitchen. A technical sketch lay on the counter beside a stack of mail. He had placed it there that afternoon. It showed a revised cooling assembly with numbered pressure channels and a handwritten material specification. The drawing looked valuable. It was detailed enough to tempt someone who understood what it might represent. It was also wrong. Channel 7 narrowed at the point of maximum heat transfer. Under sustained load pressure would build behind the restriction until the seal failed. Anthony poured water into a glass. From the dining room, Elizabeth began discussing investment opportunities. 20 minutes later, Anthony passed through the kitchen again. Bradley stood alone beside the counter. He was holding the sketch. Their eyes met. Bradley smiled and placed the paper down. Interesting drawing. Old idea. Does it work? Not well enough. Bradley nodded as if the answer confirmed something. Elizabeth called his name from the dining room. He picked up his wine and walked away. Anthony remained near the refrigerator. The sketch was still on the counter, but when the guests left at 9:46, it was gone. Anthony checked the trash, the floor, and the stack of mail. Then he opened the camera feed from the kitchen. The recording showed Bradley folding the drawing into thirds and slipping it inside his jacket, while Elizabeth stood beside him. Anthony watched the clip twice. He felt no surprise. The stolen design carried a hidden identification code inside the measurements. It also contained a defect no competent engineer would intentionally use. If Bradley copied it, filed it, tested it, or tried to sell it, he would not be stealing Anthony's invention. He would be signing his own name beneath the theft. Anthony saved the kitchen footage to 2 encrypted drives before sunrise. One remained inside the locked compartment of his van. The other went into a padded envelope addressed to Catherine Brooks. He included photographs of the missing sketch, the original digital file, and a technical note explaining the deliberate defect inside Channel 7. At 8:15, Catherine called. You are certain Bradley took it? The camera shows him folding it and putting it inside his jacket. And the drawing is not a working design. It will operate briefly. Under sustained load pressure will build behind the narrowed channel. The seal will fail. How quickly? Between 40 and 70 minutes, depending on temperature. Catherine exhaled. That makes it dangerous. It makes it traceable. The measurements contain an identification sequence. Every 7th decimal matches the filing code from my second patent, so if he submits it anywhere, we can prove where it came from. Yes. Do not contact him. I was not planning to. Catherine hired David Chen that afternoon. David was a licensed forensic accountant with an office in Buckhead and a reputation for finding money that people believed had disappeared. Anthony met him 2 days later in Catherine's conference room. David placed a thin folder on the table. I started with public records, he said. Belmont Ridge Holdings was formed 8 months ago. I know. What you may not know is that Elizabeth and Bradley both have financial authority. The filing listed her as managing member. The banking resolution lists both. David said. Bradley can initiate transfers below $100,000 without a second signature. How did you obtain that a lender attached the resolution to a commercial application? It became part of a recorded exhibit. David turned the page. Belmont has received deposits from 4 sources. 2 are commissions paid to Elizabeth. 1 came from Shaw Urban Development. The 4th came from a private lender in Charlotte. How much? $250,000. For what? The stated purpose was property acquisition. Did they acquire property? Number 1. David slid a spreadsheet toward Anthony. The money had moved quickly. $40,000 went to a hotel account. $62,000 covered overdue subcontractor payments for Bradley's Midtown project. Another $31,000 paid a luxury vehicle lease. Smaller transfers covered jewelry restaurants, airfare, and a private club. Anthony read every line. He felt the affair before David named it. The hotel charges were too frequent. The destinations matched nights Elizabeth claimed to be attending client events. Still, Anthony focused on the larger numbers. What is Bradley's financial position? David opened another file. Worse than it appears. Shaw Urban Development has liens on 2 projects. A construction loan matures in 6 weeks. Several subcontractors have filed claims. If the Midtown project does not receive new capital, the lender can begin foreclosure. And Elizabeth's debt, more than $640,000, not including the proposed home equity loan. She earns well. She spends better. Catherine watched him carefully, but Anthony kept his eyes on the spreadsheet. The numbers created a clean picture. Elizabeth and Bradley did not merely want control of the house. They needed its equity to keep Bradley's projects alive. The stolen drawing offered another possibility. If they believed Anthony's work was worthless, they might sell the sketch as their own before anyone discovered the fraud. David closed the folder. I will continue tracing Belmont's accounts. I may need formal discovery later. Do what the law allows, Anthony said. That is usually enough. At Foster Appliance Services, the work continued as though nothing had changed. Raymond called Anthony into his office on Friday afternoon. The room smelled of coffee and old paper invoices. I want you running field operations, Raymond said. What happened to Eric? He is retiring in December. You already solved the difficult jobs, train the younger technicians, and keep customers from suing us. That last part is mostly accurate invoices. Raymond smiled. It comes with a salary increase and an office. Anthony thought about Whitmore, the patents, and the meeting scheduled for the following week. I cannot accept. Raymond's smile disappeared. Why, I may have obligations soon. That would make the position unfair to you. Another company recruiting you? Not exactly. Raymond studied him. You leaving not today. That answer sounds expensive. Anthony almost smiled. I will give you notice before anything changes. Raymond leaned back. Then help Noah get ready. He has talent, but he still guesses when he should measure. I will. That afternoon, Anthony showed Noah how to diagnose an intermittent motor fault without replacing the control board. Why do you always check the cheap parts first? Noah asked. Because expensive mistakes often begin with simple assumptions. When Anthony returned home, Elizabeth was waiting in the kitchen. She had removed her wedding ring and placed it beside a glass of water. We need to talk. Anthony set his keys down. All right, I want a trial separation. The words landed without surprise. He had already seen them forming in the documents, the late nights, and the careful contempt. What does that mean to you? It means you leave for a while. This is my home. It is our home, and I need space. Then you can take space. Elizabeth's mouth tightened. I am not leaving. Neither am I. She folded her arms. You make everything difficult. I asked what you wanted. You said you wanted me removed. I said separated. From inside the same house. You know what I mean. Anthony looked at the ring beside the glass. When immediately? No. Elizabeth gave a small, controlled smile. You should reconsider. Why? Because by Friday, the deed will look different. Anthony said nothing. Elizabeth picked up her ring, but did not put it on. For the first time, she had stopped pretending the transfer was only about business. She believed the fraudulent paperwork was nearly complete, and she believed Anthony still had no idea it existed. Catherine confirmed the closing date on Monday morning. Friday, 10 o'clock, she said. Cumberland Trust Bank, Buckhead Branch. They approved the loan, Anthony asked. They approved the file. That is not the same thing. What did they receive? A forged power of attorney, false income statements, an inflated appraisal, and a corporate resolution giving Belmont Ridge Holdings control over the proceeds. How inflated the house was appraised at $1.4 million. It would not sell for that. I know. The appraiser has completed 3 assignments for Bradley Shaw. What happens now, I contacted the bank's fraud department. Their investigator is Rachel Monroe. She wants to meet us this afternoon. Rachel's office occupied the 6th floor of Cumberland Trust's operations building near Lenox Road. Catherine placed copies of the forged documents on the table. The borrower claims Mr. Wilson authorized the transaction through this power of attorney, Rachel said. I did not, Anthony replied. Can you prove your location on the notarization date? Anthony slid forward a packet containing GPS records, a signed make and service invoice, fuel receipts, and a time-stamped photograph from the customer's loading dock. Rachel studied each page. This is strong. There is more, Catherine said. She provided the Belmont filings camera stills of Bradley entering the garage and David Chen's preliminary financial report. Rachel looked at Anthony. Does your wife know you are here? No. Does Mr. Shaw know you recovered the documents? No. Rachel closed the folder. Outside traffic moved along Lenox Road while the bank prepared to let the trap close. If I stop the closing today, they will know the file has been challenged. They may destroy records or create a different explanation. What do you recommend? Anthony asked. We let the appointment remain scheduled. Catherine nodded. The bank will not release funds. No, Rachel said. But we will preserve every submission communication and signature attempt. I also want a financial crimes investigator involved before Friday. She wrote a name on her pad. Owen Parker, DeKalb County Economic Crimes Unit. Will Elizabeth be arrested? That depends on evidence intent and what she does next. My job is to protect the bank and document the fraud. Mr. Parker will decide what belongs in a criminal investigation. Anthony looked at the forged signature again. Then call him. Owen Parker met them that evening at Catherine's office. Anthony showed him the recovered security footage. Bradley opened the cabinet. Elizabeth stood beside him. Both examined the Whitmore letter. Then Bradley installed the microphone. Owen paused the video. Do they know the device remains active? They believe it does, Anthony said. And you have been feeding them false technical information, only about an obsolete prototype, nothing involving the loan. Good. Keep financial matters away from that microphone. Owen requested copies of the original camera files, metadata bank records, and Anthony's written timeline. Do not remove the listening device yet, he said. Photograph it regularly. Do not touch it unless necessary. What about my patent records? Anthony asked. Move anything valuable out of the house. The next morning, Anthony rented a secure vault at Southern National Bank. He carried Harold's notebooks in a weatherproof case. The patent certificates, encrypted drives, laboratory data, and working prototype components filled 2 additional containers. Catherine witnessed the inventory. Each item received a number. Each seal was photographed. The bank manager signed the custody record. Anthony kept only copies in the garage cabinet. He also replaced the real prototype drawings with incomplete versions that could not reveal the working design. When he returned home, Elizabeth was cooking pot roast. She had not prepared Anthony's favorite meal in more than a year. The table was set with cloth napkins. A bottle of red wine stood between two glasses. "You are early," she said. "So are you. I canceled a showing. Why, I thought we should have dinner." He sat across from her. Elizabeth served the food and asked about his day. Her voice was softer than usual. She smiled when he described a restaurant freezer repair, though she had never found those stories interesting before. After several minutes, she touched his wrist. "I do not want this separation to become ugly. Neither do I. We have shared a lot. We have. Maybe we can remain friends." Anthony looked at her hand. A diamond bracelet circled her wrist. The stones were small, but the setting was expensive. "That is new." Elizabeth withdrew her hand. "A client gave it to me, for closing a sale, for helping with a difficult transaction." Anthony nodded. Later, he photographed the bracelet while Elizabeth showered. David traced the model through a jewelry receipt charged to Bradley's business account. The price was $18,700. That night, Elizabeth joined Anthony in the living room. "Have you reviewed our insurance policies lately?" she asked. "No. What about life insurance?" "Nothing has changed. Do you have investments I should know about?" Anthony turned down the television. "Why are you asking if we separate? Both of us need a complete picture. My salary enters our shared account. You can see it. I mean business interests. I repair appliances. And the garage project. You heard me. It failed." Elizabeth watched him for a moment, then smiled. "I suppose that simplifies things." She went upstairs, leaving her tablet on the coffee table. The screen lit before Anthony could look away. A message from Bradley appeared. "Friday morning. Once he is out, everything becomes easier." Anthony did not touch the tablet. He photographed the message with his phone, including the time sender and full screen. Then he sent it to Catherine and Owen. 3 minutes later, Elizabeth returned. She picked up the tablet and glanced at Anthony. "Did anyone message me?" Anthony looked back at the television. "I heard it vibrate." Elizabeth checked the screen. Her shoulders relaxed. Anthony said nothing. Friday was no longer only a fraudulent closing. It was the day Elizabeth and Bradley planned to remove him from his own house. Anthony arrived at the St. Regis Atlanta 12 minutes early. He wore an old charcoal suit from Harold's funeral. His shoes were polished. His watch cost less than the hotel's breakfast buffet. Margaret Hayes waited on the 10th floor beside a frosted glass door. She wore a navy suit and carried a tablet beneath one arm. "Mr. Wilson, Miss Hayes, thank you for coming discreetly. That has become a habit." The conference room overlooked Buckhead. Morning light reflected from Buckhead's towers. Only 2 men sat at the walnut table. Anthony recognized Dr. Samuel Reed from technical review calls. The older man beside him required no introduction. Charles Whitmore was 68, white-haired, and still. He had built Whitmore Energy Systems into one of America's largest private energy companies. Charles stood and offered his hand. "Anthony Wilson, Mr. Whitmore." "Charles is fine." Anthony shook his hand. Charles gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Samuel tells me you corrected 3 assumptions in his thermal model. They were reasonable assumptions. They were wrong." Anthony sat. "So were hundreds of mine." Samuel smiled. "That is the first reason I recommended the acquisition." Margaret closed the door and placed a thick folder before Anthony. Charles did not begin with the money. He asked about failure. What happens if a coolant pump stops during peak load? The system isolates the affected bank within 4 seconds. And if the sensor network fails, mechanical pressure valves respond independently. What if maintenance crews delay service? The channels remain below critical temperature for 26 minutes after full circulation loss. Why 26? Because 25 was not enough. Charles watched him. Anthony recognized the test. Charles wanted to know whether he respected the distance between a prototype and a system people might trust. Samuel activated a wall display. Graphs appeared from the independent trials. Anthony's cooling system had reduced peak cell temperatures, limited heat spread between modules, and shortened emergency shutdown time. Samuel pointed to the final column. At commercial scale, our models show a 38% reduction in thermal failure events. Models are not facilities, Anthony said. No, Samuel replied, but the Arizona pilot confirmed the direction. Charles folded his hands. Insurance savings alone could justify adoption. Maintenance savings make it profitable. The safety improvement makes it necessary. Anthony looked at the trial photographs. What materials did you use for the secondary seal's fluorocarbon compound? Samuel said. Domestic supplier 1 in Ohio. Keep it domestic. Charles raised an eyebrow. That matters to you. If replacement parts cross an ocean during a shutdown, the system is not resilient. Anthony had repaired enough failed machines to know that impressive numbers meant nothing, unless ordinary technicians could keep the system safe under pressure in real working conditions. Margaret opened the folder. Whitmore Energy Systems is prepared to acquire exclusive commercial licensing rights to your patent portfolio. She turned the first page toward him. The number appeared in plain black print. $96 million. Anthony read it without moving. The figure included an initial payment milestones royalties and continued technical oversight. Charles watched his face. You expected less. I expected conditions. There are conditions. Worker training funded, independent safety audits annual, access to incident data. You will have it. Authority to stop deployment if field results contradict testing. Samuel looked toward Charles. Charles answered, within defined technical standards, yes. Anthony turned another page. Margaret explained the legal structure. Harold's earliest notebooks predated Anthony's marriage. Initial laboratory purchases had been paid through Harold's estate. The first patent application had been filed before Elizabeth became financially involved in the household. Georgia uses equitable distribution, Margaret said. That does not automatically make every dollar separate property. Any marital appreciation must be disclosed and evaluated. I am not hiding anything from the court. We know. Catherine provided the development timeline, Charles said. Your records are unusually complete. My father labeled everything. And you kept everything. Anthony thought of the notebooks inside the Southern National Vault. Margaret described a trust preserving Anthony's earliest patent rights and blocking unauthorized transfers. Anthony tapped the page. I want language stating that the trust cannot be used to avoid lawful obligations. Margaret made a note. That will be added. Charles leaned back. Most people negotiate for more money. Most people did not find a microphone under their workbench. Silence held the room. Anthony removed a file from his canvas bag. He placed photographs of Elizabeth Bradley, the forged power of attorney, the false deed documents, and the stolen sketch across the table. Charles examined them one by one. This man entered your home, yes, and your wife assisted him. The footage shows that. Samuel studied the decoy drawing. This channel restriction would cause seal failure. That is intentional. You let him take it, I let him believe he found it. Charles looked at Anthony differently after that. Not with admiration, with recognition. You prepare several moves ahead. I repair systems. Damage rarely begins where it becomes visible. Margaret gathered the photographs into order. The acquisition should remain confidential until the property matter is stabilized. That is what Catherine recommended, Anthony said. Charles glanced at the calendar displayed on the wall. The final signing is Friday. The fraudulent closing is also Friday. At what time? 10 in the morning. Our signing is scheduled for 2. Anthony closed the folder. Elizabeth believes I will be out of the house before breakfast. Charles looked toward Margaret. Arrange transportation. A sedan, she asked. Charles returned his attention to Anthony. A limousine. Anthony almost objected. Then he understood that Charles had chosen visibility as carefully as Anthony had chosen silence. Have it collect me at the house, Anthony said. Margaret paused. Are you expecting a confrontation? Anthony placed Bradley's text message on top of the photographs. Friday morning. Once he is out, everything becomes easier. Charles read it. Why your house? Because that is where they plan to make me look powerless. Charles closed the acquisition folder. Then that is where we will meet. Dashu Litrong, 59, S. Fan on 9. Rain began before dawn and settled over Brookhaven. Anthony woke at 5:42, dressed in the laundry room, and left without waking Elizabeth. His final service call was at a bakery near Chamblay, where a walk-in cooler had stopped. By 8:36, he had replaced a burned relay and restored the temperature. Noah watched him close the panel. You sure you want to handle this one yourself? Noah asked. Anthony wiped his hands. Yes. You seem different today. I know what I'm walking into. Noah waited for an explanation. Anthony gave none. At 9:07, the Ford Transit turned onto Cedar Hollow Drive. Anthony saw the black trash bags before he reached the driveway. They were stacked beside the front porch. Shirts, work pants, shoes, and old paper files pressed against the plastic. One bag had split open. A sleeve from his Navy uniform dragged across the wet brick. His garage remote did nothing. Anthony pressed it again. The door remained closed. He parked at the curb and stepped into the rain. Elizabeth opened the front door before he reached the walkway. She wore a cream coat, black heels, and the diamond bracelet Bradley had purchased. Her hair was pinned neatly behind her head, as if she were preparing for a business meeting rather than the destruction of a marriage. Bradley stood in a tailored gray coat. You need to leave, Elizabeth said. Anthony looked at the bags. You packed my clothes. I told you I wanted space. You changed the locks. The property is no longer yours. Across the street, Diane Harper opened her front door. 2 houses down, Thomas Green stepped onto his porch with a coffee mug. Elizabeth had chosen the volume. Anthony, I will not let you endanger this house with your failed projects and hidden debts. He removed his phone and activated the recorder. What hidden debts? You know exactly what I mean. No, explain it. Bradley moved closer to the doorway. This does not need to become a public scene. Anthony looked toward the neighbors, then back at him. I did not bring it outside. Elizabeth lifted a folder from a table near the door. This house belongs to Belmont Ridge Holdings now. She removed a recorded deed and held it where Anthony could see the county stamp. The filing looked official. That was its purpose. Anthony recognized the legal description, the forged authorization, and Melissa Crane's seal. He also noticed the recording date. The transfer had been filed 36 hours earlier. Did you authorize this? He asked. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. I am the managing member. That was not my question. Did you personally authorize the transfer of this house into Belmont Ridge? Holdings Bradley spoke before she could answer. You have no right to interrogate her. Anthony kept his eyes on Elizabeth. Did you authorize it? Yes, she said. I did. The rain struck the paper between them. And you are denying me access to the residence. You no longer live here. Is that your decision? It is done. Diane had crossed to the edge of her lawn. Thomas remained beneath his porch roof, but his phone was raised now. Anthony noted both witnesses. Bradley stepped outside. You should collect your property before the bags are removed. Removed where the curb. Anthony looked at the trash bags again. 10 years of clothing had been reduced to wet plastic and public theater. Still, he felt less humiliation than clarity. Elizabeth believed she had won because the locks had changed. She had mistaken possession for ownership. She had mistaken silence for ignorance. Then she disappeared inside and returned holding Harold's leather jacket. Anthony's breathing changed. The jacket was dark brown, worn at the elbows and cracked along the left pocket. Harold had worn it during winter site inspections. After his death, Anthony had cleaned it once and never worn it again. Elizabeth held it by the collar. "You forgot this piece of junk. Give it to me." She looked toward the neighbors. Then she threw it. The jacket landed in a puddle beside the walkway. Water spread across the leather. For 1 second, Anthony saw nothing except his father's hand resting on that same sleeve years earlier, his fingers curled. Bradley smiled. Anthony walked to the puddle, lifted the jacket, and folded it over his arm. He did not speak. The restraint unsettled Bradley. Elizabeth pointed toward the garage. "Bring out the toolbox." Bradley opened the side door. He returned, carrying the red steel toolbox Anthony had owned since he was 19. "Set it down," Anthony said. Bradley held his gaze, then tipped it forward. The drawers opened. Wrenches, meters, screwdrivers, drill bits, and sockets struck the concrete and scattered into the grass. A voltage tester rolled beneath the hedge. Harold's brass caliper landed in the gutter. The sound brought another neighbor to a window. Anthony placed the jacket on the hood of his van and knelt in the rain. Rainwater ran from his sleeves, but he never looked away from people at the door. He picked up each tool. Bradley watched from the walkway. This is what happens when a man refuses to accept reality. Anthony retrieved the brass caliper from the flowing water. "No," he said. "This is what happens when people think no one kept records." Bradley's expression shifted. Only slightly. Elizabeth stepped forward. "Is that a threat?" "It is a fact." A low engine entered the street. The sound was too smooth for a delivery truck and too heavy for a sedan. Everyone turned. A long black limousine moved through the rain and stopped directly behind Anthony's battered Ford Transit. Its body reflected the scattered tools, the trash bags, and Elizabeth's cream coat. The chauffeur stepped out beneath a black umbrella. He walked to the rear passenger door and opened it. Elizabeth straightened. For a moment, she smiled. She believed one of her wealthy clients had arrived. Then, a black shoe touched the wet pavement. Charles Whitmore stepped from the limousine beneath the chauffeur's umbrella. Rain silvered his white hair and dark overcoat. He paused beside the open door, taking in the trash bags, scattered tools, wet leather jacket, and Anthony kneeling near the gutter. Margaret Hayes emerged from the opposite side, carrying a silver legal case. Elizabeth moved first. Her posture changed with practiced speed. The anger left her face replaced by the polished smile she used at luxury showings. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, extending her hand. "Elizabeth Wilson Whitaker, Premier Realty. I believe we may have several mutual contacts." Charles looked at her hand, then past her. He crossed the lawn toward Anthony. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson." Anthony stood holding Harold's brass caliper. "Morning, Charles." Charles shook his hand firmly. The neighbors became silent. Elizabeth's extended hand lowered. Bradley stepped off the porch. "You know him?" Charles turned toward him. "I know the inventor whose technology my company is acquiring." The sentence landed more heavily than any accusation. Elizabeth stared at Anthony's stained uniform, then at Margaret's silver case. Margaret opened an umbrella over Anthony. "Our final signing remains scheduled for 2 o'clock, she said. "The board has approved the acquisition documents." Elizabeth's lips parted. What acquisition? Anthony placed the caliper inside the toolbox. The one connected to the garage project. "You said it failed. I said an old prototype failed." Bradley looked toward the garage. Charles followed his glance. "Mr. Shaw," he said, "I understand you have shown unusual interest in Mr. Wilson's technical work." Bradley recovered quickly. "I have no idea what you mean." A dark sedan stopped behind the limousine. Catherine Brooks stepped out with Rachel Monroe beside her. Catherine carried a waterproof document pouch. Rachel wore a bank identification badge clipped inside her coat. Elizabeth's smile disappeared entirely. Catherine Anthony said, "We have the order." Catherine crossed the lawn and faced Elizabeth. "Elizabeth Wilson, you know who I am, I am serving you with notice of an emergency temporary injunction issued by the Superior Court of DeKalb County. She removed a sealed packet. Elizabeth did not take it. Catherine placed it on the covered porch table. The order freezes Belmont Ridge Holdings and prohibits any sale, refinancing, transfer, destruction, concealment, or removal of property connected to the disputed residence. This is ridiculous, Elizabeth said. The house belongs to Belmont. That transfer is now under judicial review. Bradley stepped closer. On what basis? Forgery, fraud, unlawful conversion, and suspected conspiracy. Rachel opened her folder. Cumberland Trust Bank has suspended the loan transaction scheduled for this morning. Elizabeth turned toward her. You cannot do that. The closing was approved. The application contained material inconsistencies, including false financial statements and a disputed power of attorney. It is not disputed. Anthony looked at her. I dispute it. Elizabeth's face tightened. You knew for longer than you think. Bradley moved toward the front door. Catherine raised her voice. Mr. Shaw, the injunction also requires preservation of all electronic devices, records, drawings, and communications related to Belmont Ridge Holdings, this property, and Anthony Wilson's intellectual property. Bradley stopped. Charles stood beside Anthony without speaking. His presence changed the shape of the scene. Elizabeth could no longer present Anthony as a confused repairman creating trouble outside her house. Margaret opened the silver case. Inside rested a bound acquisition agreement bearing Whitmore Energy Systems' seal. She removed the cover page and held it beneath the umbrella. Mr. Wilson's patent portfolio completed independent engineering review 3 weeks ago, she said. The company has accepted the technology for commercial development. Elizabeth looked at Anthony. How much? He did not answer. This is some performance, she said. You brought wealthy people here to humiliate me. Anthony glanced at his clothes inside the torn bags. I did not pack the audience. Diane Harper lowered her phone. Thomas Green remained under his porch, watching without expression. Rachel spoke again. The bank will require access to all original documents used in the application. They are inside, Elizabeth said. Then no one should remove them. Bradley stepped backward through the doorway. I need to call my attorney. You may, Catherine said. Do not destroy or relocate anything. A Gray County vehicle turned onto Cedar Hollow Drive and parked near the mailbox. Owen Parker exited wearing a rain jacket over plain clothes. Another investigator remained inside. Bradley saw him. For the first time that morning, his confidence broke visibly. He looked toward the hallway, then toward the side of the house. Owen approached without rushing. Bradley did not answer. I need you to remain available while we preserve records related to a financial fraud inquiry. You have no warrant. I did not say I was searching you. I said you need to remain available. Bradley turned toward Elizabeth. She stared at him, waiting for control he no longer possessed. Then he moved. He crossed the entry hall, pushed through the kitchen, and disappeared toward the rear door. Owen followed to the side walkway. Anthony did not chase him. He lifted Harold's jacket from the van hood and held it beneath the umbrella. Mud marked one sleeve. Rain had darkened the leather, but the stitching remained intact. Charles watched him smooth the damaged collar. Your father's? He asked. Yes, we can have it restored. Anthony looked towards the house. Some damage should remain visible. A gate slammed behind the garage. Bradley appeared in the narrow side yard and ran toward the rear fence. His expensive shoes slipped in the wet grass, but he recovered and reached for the latch. Owen entered the yard behind him. Mr. Shaw, stop. Bradley pulled the gate open. On the opposite side stood the second county investigator, already waiting beneath the trees. Bradley froze with one hand still gripping the latch. Behind him, Owen calmly repeated the instruction. Step away from the gate. This time Bradley obeyed. The neighbors watched as the man who had mocked Anthony finally lowered his eyes in silence. Owen guided Bradley back toward the front yard without touching him. The second investigator followed behind. Bradley's gray coat was streaked with mud along one sleeve, and his shoes were wet. Elizabeth stood beneath the porch roof holding the injunction packet. "This has gone far enough," she said. "Bradley has done nothing." Owen stopped near the walkway. "Then preserving the evidence will help him." Bradley looked toward his car parked across the street. "I want my attorney present." "You may call one," Owen said. "Until then, do not leave and do not access any electronic device." Catherine turned to Anthony. "We should move inside. The order gives you temporary access to the residence and garage." Elizabeth blocked the doorway. "He is not coming into my house." Catherine removed another page from the pouch. "The court restored Mr. Wilson's access pending review of the disputed deed. Interfering with that order would create another problem for you." For several seconds, Elizabeth did not move. Then Charles stepped beside Anthony. "We can conduct the signing elsewhere," he said. Anthony looked at Harold's jacket over his arm. "No, the records are inside." Elizabeth finally stepped away. The group entered the living room. Rain tapped against the windows while the neighbors remained outside watching. Owen asked everyone to leave their devices on the dining table. Elizabeth placed down her phone and tablet. Bradley surrendered 2 phones, a laptop, and an encrypted drive from his coat pocket. Rachel Monroe photographed each item. Catherine opened the first evidence binder. "Let us establish the property issue," she said. She placed the original purchase agreement beside the disputed deed. The purchase records showed Anthony's inheritance had funded most of the down payment. Both spouses had been listed as owners. Then she displayed the limited power of attorney. Mr. Wilson's signature appears here, witnessed by Melissa Crane. Elizabeth folded her arms. He signed it. Anthony placed the make and service packet on the table. "At 10:14 that morning, I was 83 miles away, repairing a commercial freezer. The customer signed this invoice. My van's GPS recorded the location. The loading dock camera photographed me there." Rachel added the bank's authentication report. The identification attached to the notarization was a photocopy of an expired license. No live verification occurred. Bradley glanced at Elizabeth. Anthony noticed the movement. Catherine continued. "Melissa Crane is the registered agent for Belmont Ridge Holdings and works from a suite inside Shaw Urban Development." "That proves nothing," Bradley said. "It proves she was not an independent stranger," Catherine replied. Owen opened a sealed evidence bag containing printed camera stills. The first image showed Bradley entering the garage. The second showed Elizabeth pointing at the steel cabinet. The third showed Bradley manipulating the lock. The fourth showed both of them reading the confidential Whitmore letter. Elizabeth's face changed. "You recorded us without permission." "The cameras were installed in our home 4 years ago," Anthony said. "You controlled the cloud account. You deleted the visible recordings. You forgot the local backup." Catherine placed the access log beside the images. Every deleted segment had been removed through Elizabeth's administrator account between 1 and 3 in the morning. Bradley leaned toward the table. "These images have no sound. You cannot prove what anyone discussed." "No," Anthony said, "but the microphone can." Owen removed another evidence photograph showing the black listening device beneath the cabinet. Bradley's eyes fixed on it. "The device remained active after Mr. Wilson discovered it," Owen said. "Its placement, serial number, and wireless registration are being traced." "I have never seen that," Bradley said. Anthony opened the laptop containing the original footage. The video showed Bradley crouching beneath the cabinet, reaching behind the support, and withdrawing an empty hand. The room stayed in complete silence until the clip ended. Catherine turned to the intellectual property binder. "This is the drawing removed from the kitchen during the dinner Mr. Shaw attended." She displayed the original file, the camera footage, and still images of Bradley folding the page into his jacket. Bradley stood abruptly. "That drawing was abandoned property." "Sit down," Owen said. Bradley remained standing. Charles spoke from the end of the table. "You submitted that drawing to North Star Industrial Ventures 3 days later." Bradley slowly turned toward him. Margaret Hayes opened the silver case and removed a printed proposal bearing Shaw Urban Development's logo. North Star contacted Whitmore Energy Systems after recognizing similarities to Mr. Wilson's pending patent claims, she said. "Your proposal described the design as proprietary technology developed by your company." Bradley looked at the document. The proposal included the narrow 7th channel, the defective seal specification, and Anthony's hidden decimal sequence. Samuel Reed had prepared a technical comparison. Every copied measurement appeared in red. Charles tapped the page. "The design would fail under sustained load. Mr. Wilson knew that. You did not." Bradley lowered himself into the chair. Elizabeth stared at Anthony. "You planned this. I preserved what you chose to do." David Chen arrived carrying a final binder. He laid out Belmont's bank records, Bradley's construction liens, Elizabeth's diverted commissions hotel, Charge's jewelry receipt, and transfers used to cover Shaw Urban Development's unpaid subcontractors. The proposed loan proceeds were scheduled to move through 3 accounts within 48 hours, David said. Most would have reached Bradley's distressed projects. Elizabeth looked toward Bradley again. He did not meet her eyes. David turned one final page. "There is also a payment of $30,000 to Melissa Crane issued 2 days after the forged power of attorney was notarized." Owen closed the binder. The evidence no longer resembled a private marital dispute. It formed a sequence forgery, surveillance theft, false filing attempted financing, and planned diversion of funds. Anthony stood beside the wet jacket and scattered tools. For months, Elizabeth and Bradley had treated his silence as emptiness. Now every quiet day had become a dated record, a preserved message, or a camera file. And all of it was speaking at once. Owen permitted Bradley to leave only after investigators copied the contents of his devices and recorded his statement. Bradley departed with an attorney who had arrived in a black sedan. Elizabeth remained in the dining room while Catherine explained the injunction again. "You may stay temporarily," Catherine said, "but you cannot remove records, alter accounts, contact witnesses about their testimony, or interfere with Anthony's access." "This is still my home," Elizabeth replied. "It is jointly disputed property." Anthony carried his wet toolbox into the garage and placed Harold's brass caliper inside a cloth sleeve. Charles waited by the workbench. "You are still planning to sign today?" he asked. "Yes. After this morning, most people would postpone. Postponing gives them another day to interfere." Charles nodded once. At 2 o'clock, the Whitmore legal team converted Anthony's dining room into a closing office. Margaret arranged the acquisition documents in numbered stacks. Samuel Reed joined by secure video. James Caldwell, trustee of the Wilson Technical Trust, attended. Catherine reviewed every disclosure. The agreement identified the patent rights developed before the marriage, the later improvements created during it, and the royalties that might become subject to lawful division. Nothing was hidden from the court. Elizabeth stood near the doorway. "How much is it?" she asked again. No one answered immediately. Margaret looked toward Anthony. He closed the final disclosure schedule. $96 million, he said. The room became still. Elizabeth stared at him. "That is impossible." Charles remained seated. "My board disagrees. $96 million for drawings in a garage, for a thermal control system that passed independent testing," Samuel said through the screen. The drawings were only the beginning. Elizabeth gripped the back of a chair. "You told me it failed. An early prototype failed. You let me believe the entire project was worthless." Anthony met her eyes. "You entered my locked cabinet, read, 'Confidential correspondence helped Bradley photograph patent records,' and planted a microphone beneath my workbench. That does not answer me. It answers why I stopped trusting you with information. Her face hardened. We were married. I had a right to know. You had a right to truthful financial disclosure. You did not have a right to steal technical files or forge my name. Elizabeth looked toward Charles. He is making me sound like a criminal because our marriage was unhappy. Charles did not respond. Catherine did. The evidence is doing that, not Anthony. Margaret placed the signature page before him. The initial payment would enter escrow until required disclosures were completed. Royalties would be reported through the trust. Anthony would remain technical advisor with authority over safety review and training. He signed Anthony Harold Wilson. The signature was unmistakably his. James Caldwell signed as trustee. Charles signed for Whitmore Energy Systems. Margaret notarized the transaction before 2 witnesses. At 2:23, the acquisition became binding. The achievement felt less like victory than closing of a door he had guarded alone. Charles extended his hand. "Welcome to Whitmore." Anthony shook it. Elizabeth watched Margaret close the silver case. "You could have told me," she said. Anthony looked at her without anger. "There was a time when I wanted to, when before contempt became the only language you used with me." She stepped closer. "You think money makes you better than I am now?" "No. Money only made you look at me differently. We can fix this." Catherine moved between them. "All future marital communication should go through counsel." "I am speaking to my husband." "Not for long," Anthony said. He handed Catherine a signed divorce petition. Elizabeth's expression changed again. "You prepared that before today. I prepared it after I confirmed the forgery. You cannot end 11 years without discussing it. You ended the discussion when you changed the locks." She looked down at the petition. Michael Grant, her attorney, arrived before 3 and asked to speak with Elizabeth privately. Anthony returned to the garage while their conversation continued behind the closed study door. At 3:18, David Chen called. "I found another account," he said. Anthony stepped outside. "What kind?" "A revolving credit line opened 18 months ago under your name." "I never opened one." "The application used your social security number and electronic copy of your license and income statements from Foster Appliance Services." "How much was borrowed?" $184,000. "Where did it go first?" "To a joint account controlled by Belmont. Then to Shaw Urban Development." Anthony looked through the garage window at Elizabeth's silhouette inside the study. "Who signed the application?" "You did, according to the lender." "I did not." "I know." "The electronic signature came from an internet address assigned to your home, when during a week you were in Athens for refrigeration training." Anthony remembered the trip. Elizabeth had encouraged him to stay an extra night because she claimed to have an early showing. David continued. "There are also 2 business credit cards under Wilson Technical Services. That company does not exist." "It does now. It was registered using your identity 14 months ago." Anthony closed his eyes briefly. The house transfer had not been the beginning. It had been the largest move in a pattern that had continued for more than a year. Send everything to Catherine and Owen. Already done. When Anthony re-entered the dining room, Catherine was reading the new report. Elizabeth saw it in her hands. "What now?" she asked. Anthony placed the false credit application beside the forged power of attorney. "This loan was opened in my name 18 months ago." Elizabeth looked at the page, but said nothing. Michael Grant turned toward her. "Elizabeth, do not answer." Anthony studied the date, the home internet record, and the copied license. Then he understood why she had wanted him out before Friday. The deed fraud could be challenged, but once investigators searched deeper, they would find that she had been living on his stolen identity long before she tried to steal his house. The forensic review lasted 11 weeks. During that time, Anthony moved into a furnished apartment near Decatur. He took only clothing tools, Harold's jacket, and the small wooden box containing his father's recordings. The Brookhaven house remained under court supervision. Elizabeth stayed there temporarily, while every account connected to Belmont Ridge Holdings was frozen. Michael Grant advised her not to contact Anthony directly. She followed that advice after 2 messages were preserved. David Chen worked through 18 months of transfers. Elizabeth had opened the revolving credit line using Anthony's identity. The lender's records showed that her phone received the verification code. The application had been completed through the Wilson Home Network, while Anthony attended training in Athens. The money moved into Belmont, and then into Bradley's failing projects. The 2 false business credit cards paid for hotel rooms, jewelry flights, private dinners, and construction expenses. Bradley used one account to purchase materials for a condominium project burdened by liens. Elizabeth's commissions had also been redirected. David identified more than $300,000 that should have entered disclosed accounts. Instead, the money passed through Belmont, where it paid Bradley's debts and financed their travel. Hotel records confirmed that Elizabeth and Bradley had shared rooms in Atlanta, Savannah, Charlotte, and Miami. Anthony read the report once. The affair mattered emotionally, but the financial crimes reached beyond betrayal. Loans had been opened in his name. Creditors had been given false documents. His identity had become collateral for someone else's desperation. Catherine filed motions to separate the legitimate marital questions from the fraudulent obligations. Judge Rebecca Langford presided over the hearing. Elizabeth sat beside Michael Grant. Bradley occupied another table with counsel. Melissa Crane appeared under subpoena. When asked whether Anthony had appeared before her, Melissa said she did not remember. Then Owen presented building access records, phone location data, and a payment from Shaw Urban Development. Melissa changed her answer. She admitted Bradley had delivered the power of attorney signed. She notarized it without Anthony present after Elizabeth confirmed that the signature belonged to her husband. Elizabeth stared forward. Bradley wrote something for his attorney. Judge Langford invalidated the power of attorney, the Belmont deed transfer, and dependent liens. The Brookhaven house returned to its original joint ownership pending division. The court also ruled that debts created through Anthony's stolen identity would not be treated as marital obligations. This ruling does not decide criminal responsibility, Judge Langford said. It determines only that Mr. Wilson did not authorize these transactions. Prosecutors continued reviewing forgery identity theft, bank fraud, and conspiracy. Bradley's lenders moved faster. Once the fraudulent collateral disappeared, Shaw Urban Development lost access to financing. 2 projects entered foreclosure. Subcontractors obtained judgments. North Star Industrial Ventures filed a claim over the stolen technical proposal. Anthony did nothing to accelerate the collapse. He simply refused to rescue it. The divorce negotiations remained orderly. Catherine disclosed the Whitmore acquisition as required. Experts divided the patent value between premarital development, inherited contributions from Harold, and improvements created during the marriage. Elizabeth received the lawful share. Anthony did not challenge it. He also did not pay the fraudulent debts, protect Bradley, or trade evidence for a faster settlement. Fair is not the same as generous, Catherine told him. It is also not the same as revenge, Anthony replied. The Brookhaven house became the final dispute. Elizabeth wanted to keep it, but she could not refinance after the investigation damaged her credit. Anthony could have purchased her interest. He chose not to. The court authorized repairs and sale. Anthony returned one Saturday with a restoration contractor. Rain had warped the front closet floor. The garage lock was broken. Several walls needed repainting after investigators removed devices. He repaired the garage himself. Noah helped. Together, they replaced the cabinet lock, rewired the security panel, cleaned the workbench, and sorted tools that had been thrown onto the lawn. Noah held up the brass caliper. This one's still accurate. Anthony checked it against a block. Within 1,000th. After landing in a gutter, my father bought quality. They worked until sunset. Before leaving, Anthony stood alone in the empty living room. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like a place where evidence had once waited inside walls. 3 weeks later, it sold to a family with 2 children. The proceeds were divided under the temporary property order. Anthony signed the closing papers without regret. That evening, he returned to his apartment and opened Harold's wooden box. Inside were labeled cassette tapes, spare keys, a pocket knife, and a digital recorder he had forgotten. The battery was dead. He replaced it from his toolbox. 7 audio files appeared. Most contained measurements and reminders from Harold's workshop. The final file was recorded 4 days before his death. Anthony pressed play. Harold's breathing sounded weak, but his voice remained steady. Anthony, if you find this, I probably ran out of time before I said everything properly. Anthony sat at the kitchen table. You always think being quiet means you have to carry things alone. It does not. Quiet is useful when you are listening, measuring, or waiting for the truth. But do not let people convince you that patience means permission. Anthony lowered his head. Harold continued. Protect your work. Protect your name. And when the machine is damaged beyond repair, stop rebuilding the same broken part. The recording ended with a soft click. Anthony remained still for a long time. Outside traffic moved through Decatur. Below, a child laughed in the parking lot. Anthony played the message once more. For years he had believed finishing the invention would complete his father's unfinished work. Now he understood that Harold had left him another design, not for a cooling system, for knowing when to repair, when to document, and when to finally walk away. For the first time since the rain-soaked morning, he felt no need to defend himself, explain himself, or prove what had already survived. 6 months after the house sold, Anthony stood inside a renovated warehouse in Decatur. The building once stored restaurant equipment. Now its brick walls held electrical panels, battery modules, safety stations, and steel workbenches. A new sign hung above the entrance, Wilson Technical Foundation. Anthony committed $20 million from the acquisition to create the foundation. Its purpose was simple, train-skilled people who lacked money connections or traditional credentials. Tuition was free. Students received tools, transportation support, and paid apprenticeships. Every course included safety, honest billing, diagnostic discipline, and the right to stop dangerous work. Anthony refused to name the main laboratory after himself. The plaque beside the door read, Harold Wilson, Applied Systems Lab. Noah Bennett became the Foundation's first lead instructor. On opening morning, he stood beside a refrigeration simulator in a blue work shirt. You realize I am still younger than half the instructors, Noah asked. You measure before guessing, Anthony said. That puts you ahead of many older technicians. Raymond Foster attended the ceremony carrying an envelope. Inside was Anthony's original employment application from 14 years earlier. You wrote that your long-term goal was to improve equipment safety, Raymond said. I forgot that. I did not. Foster Appliance Services became an apprenticeship partner. Raymond agreed to hire graduates based on skill rather than degrees. Charles Whitmore arrived without the limousine. He came in a dark sedan, toured the laboratory, and spent 40 minutes questioning students about pressure controls and thermal isolation. Whitmore Energy Systems funded 2 additional training centers in Georgia and licensed Anthony's safety curriculum for its maintenance teams. The cooling system rollout began carefully. Anthony reviewed field reports weekly. When one pilot facility showed unexpected seal wear, he delayed expansion for 11 days, while Samuel Reed's team identified a supplier defect. Investors complained. Charles supported it. A schedule can recover, Anthony told the board. A dead technician cannot. The defective seals were replaced before any failure occurred. Anthony's royalties increased, but his daily life changed less than people expected. He purchased a house outside Decatur with a detached workshop. He kept the Ford Transit, though Whitmore's transportation office offered him a company vehicle. The van reminded him reliability mattered more than appearance. Bradley's situation deteriorated lawfully. Shaw Urban Development entered bankruptcy after 3 lenders accelerated their loans. 2 condominium projects were sold unfinished. North Star Industrial Ventures won an injunction preventing Bradley from marketing any technology derived from Anthony's decoy drawing. A grand jury later indicted Bradley on charges related to bank fraud, conspiracy identity theft, and attempted theft of intellectual property. Melissa Crane accepted a plea agreement. She surrendered her notary commission, admitted that she had notarized Anthony's forged signature without his presence, and agreed to testify. Elizabeth was charged separately. The indictment accused her of identity fraud, forgery, conspiracy, false statements to a financial institution, and unlawful use of Anthony's personal information. Anthony did not attend the arraignment. Catherine attended only because some restitution questions affected the divorce settlement. Elizabeth entered a plea of not guilty through Michael Grant. The case took time. Anthony understood that courts did not deliver emotional closure. They tested evidence under rules stricter than anger. He gave investigators every requested record and refused media interviews. Television producers offered money for his story. One wanted to film him returning to the Brookhaven lawn with a limousine. Anthony declined. That morning was evidence, he told Margaret. It is not entertainment. The foundation opened its first class with 32 students. Some were recent high school graduates. Others were parents changing careers after layoffs. One woman had spent 10 years repairing hotel equipment without certification. A former warehouse worker could diagnose motors by sound, but had never owned a multimeter. Anthony addressed them without a stage. He stood between 2 workbenches in his old Navy repair shirt. "You do not need expensive clothes to prove you belong here," he said. "You need discipline, you need honesty, and you need the courage to stop when a system is unsafe." He opened Harold's red toolbox. The steel was scratched from years of use and dented from the morning Bradley dumped it onto the driveway. Anthony placed the brass caliper on the bench. These tools are not valuable because they are old. They are valuable because someone used them carefully. After the speech, students moved into the laboratory. Anthony spent the afternoon teaching 3 apprentices how to trace an intermittent ground fault. He asked questions instead of giving answers. Near sunset, Catherine arrived. She carried a white envelope without a return address. "This came through Michael Grant," she said. Anthony wiped his hands on a cloth. "From Elizabeth." "Yes." "Is it part of the legal case?" "No. Her attorney says it is personal. Did you read it?" "No." Anthony looked at the envelope. The handwriting on the front was Elizabeth's. For 11 years he had seen that same handwriting on birthday cards, grocery lists, real estate brochures, and documents she once asked him to sign without reading. "What does Michael want me to do? Nothing. He only asked that I deliver it." Catherine placed it on the workbench. "You are not required to answer." "I know." Outside the laboratory windows, students crossed the parking lot carrying new tool bags. Noah locked the training cabinets. Raymond spoke with a graduate about an apprenticeship opening. The building was filled with the future Anthony had chosen instead of the life others tried to take. He waited until everyone left. Then he sat alone beneath the plaque bearing Harold's name and opened Elizabeth's letter. The first line was not an apology. It was a request. "Anthony, before the court decides what happens to me, I need you to remember who I was before Bradley." Anthony stopped reading. For the first time in months, the old marriage entered the room without lawyers, investigators, or financial records. Only her words remained. And he had to decide whether they deserved anything from him at all. Anthony unfolded the second page. Elizabeth's handwriting became less controlled as the letter continued. She wrote about their first apartment in Athens, where the air conditioner failed during August, and Anthony repaired it with borrowed tools. She remembered eating takeout on the floor because they owned no table. She remembered Harold bringing them a used refrigerator and refusing payment. For several paragraphs, she described the woman she had been before expensive listings, private clubs, and Bradley Shaw. Then the letter changed. She said Bradley had noticed her when Anthony seemed absorbed by the garage. He praised her ambition. He told her she deserved a husband whose success matched hers. When his projects began failing, he convinced her that one profitable deal would solve everything. The first loan she wrote was supposed to be temporary. She believed she could repay it before Anthony discovered it. The second account covered the first. Then Bradley needed collateral. By the time she understood that he would sacrifice her to save himself, she had already forged documents, lied to lenders, and helped him enter the cabinet. Elizabeth did not claim innocence, but she asked Anthony to tell prosecutors that Bradley had controlled her. She asked him to remember the years before the betrayal and explain that she had not always been cruel. The final paragraph contained the apology missing from the beginning. "I am sorry I threw your clothes outside. I am sorry about your father's jacket. I knew it would hurt you, and that was why I did it. I wanted you to look powerless because I was terrified you would discover how powerless I had become." Anthony read the sentence twice. The foundation was silent around him. He folded the letter, placed it in the envelope, and locked it inside his desk. The next morning he called Catherine. "Does the prosecutor need a statement about Elizabeth's character?" "Only if you choose to provide one." "Would it affect the facts?" "No." "Then I will not interfere." "Are you asking for the maximum sentence number leniency?" "No." Catherine understood. "You want the evidence to speak. It already has." Elizabeth eventually changed her plea. Faced with Melissa's testimony, bank records' electronic signatures, and the recovered messages, she pleaded guilty to identity fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to make false statements to a financial institution. Bradley refused a plea agreement. His trial lasted 9 days. Prosecutors showed the forged power of attorney, the surveillance footage, the stolen decoy drawing, Belmont transfers, and messages directing Elizabeth to remove Anthony before closing. Bradley testified that Elizabeth had created the plan. The jury did not believe him. He was convicted on every major count. At sentencing, Anthony attended only because the court invited a victim impact statement. He stood before Judge Langford wearing a dark suit and no tie. "I am not here to ask for revenge," he said. "The financial losses can be measured. The damage to trust cannot. What matters is that forged signatures, stolen identities, and technical theft create victims beyond one household. Banks rely on documents. Workers rely on safe designs. Families rely on names remaining their own." He looked neither at Elizabeth nor Bradley. "I ask only that the sentence reflect the risks they knowingly created." Bradley received a substantial prison sentence and restitution orders. Elizabeth received a shorter sentence, followed by supervised release financial restrictions and restitution. The judge cited her guilty plea and cooperation, but also her repeated choices over 18 months. Afterward, Michael Grant approached Anthony in the courthouse hallway. "She wanted to know whether you read the letter." "I did." "Do you have a response?" Anthony considered the question. "Tell her I remember who she was." Michael waited. "That is all." "Yes." Remembering was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was simply refusing to let the worst ending erase every earlier truth. 2 years later, the Wilson Technical Foundation operated 4 training centers. More than 600 students had completed programs in appliance repair, industrial cooling, electrical diagnostics, and battery safety. Most found paid work within 3 months. Noah directed curriculum across all locations. Raymond retired but taught 1 Saturday class each month. He insisted students learn how to explain repairs without frightening customers. Whitmore Energy Systems deployed Anthony's cooling system at 12 facilities. Independent audits reported fewer shutdowns, lower maintenance costs, and no thermal propagation events. Anthony still reviewed incident reports personally. One spring morning, he visited the Decatur laboratory before sunrise. A student named Maya Torres was diagnosing a training unit that repeatedly failed after 40 minutes. She had replaced nothing. Instead, she had attached sensors, recorded temperatures, and compared the results against the schematic. "What do you see?" Anthony asked. "The failure is not at the compressor," Maya said. "The pressure rises earlier near channel 7. Anthony looked at the graph. "Why a restriction upstream? Are you guessing no? I measured it." Anthony smiled, then opened the panel. Inside, they found a partially collapsed hose exactly where Maya predicted. She repaired it, tested the system, and documented every step. As the unit returned to normal operation, sunlight entered through the high warehouse windows and touched Harold's brass caliper, resting inside the display case. Anthony walked outside. His Ford Transit waited beside the curb, older now, but carefully maintained. Beyond it, students arrived carrying tool bags and coffee. No limousine stood in the street. None was needed. The morning on the lawn had once seemed like the moment everything was taken from him. In truth, it was the moment false ownership became visible. Elizabeth had thrown out his clothes. Bradley had scattered his tools. They had tried to take his house, his invention, his identity, and his name. But the parts that mattered had never belonged to them. Anthony opened the foundation doors and watched the next class enter. Then he returned to the laboratory, where damaged systems waited to be understood, measured, and repaired. This time he knew exactly what was worth saving. Anthony's story reminds us that true strength is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like keeping records while others mock your silence. And sometimes it means walking away from people, places, and dreams that have become too broken to repair. He lost trust, a marriage, a home, and the life he thought he understood. Yet those losses did not define him. What defined him was what he chose to build afterward. Instead of using his success to humiliate those who betrayed him, he used it to create opportunities for people who had been overlooked. He turned pain into purpose, evidence into justice, and hardship into a future that could help hundreds of others. The deepest lesson is this: never confuse someone's kindness with weakness, and never mistake silence for ignorance. Protect your name, your work, and your dignity. Forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation. Remembering the good in someone does not require allowing them back into your life. And moving forward does not mean the past did not matter. It means the past no longer controls you. Sometimes, the moment that feels like your greatest humiliation is actually the beginning of your freedom. What lesson from Anthony's journey touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about betrayal, courage, justice, and the strength to begin again.